I hung up the phone as I stared into my wife's eyes with the biggest smile I had ever had. "Well, what did they say, John?" my wife inquired. I was still in shock. Joy, no, relief, took over my body. "They found a match," I stuttered. My wife, Sarah, leapt forward, clutching her arms around my neck. I gently reached up and rubbed her back. It was over. I had found a match. After 6 months of slowly dying, hoping and praying to find a matching kidney, I finally found one. I haven't felt this happy since our marriage. That phone call was one of the greatest moments of my life. Well, that's what I thought. Little did I know, the gates of hell had just opened, and my life would never be the same. I'm sure you're all expecting a story of how the kidney transplant failed, or maybe some horror story of how I was awake during the surgery. God, I wish that was the case. It would have been so much easier, so much quicker, so much less painful. Shit, even a failed transplant would have been better. I probably would have only lasted a few more months. Death would have been relieving in comparison. What I got instead was nightmares. Actual, literal nightmares. They began shortly after I left the hospital and started simple enough. I would see flashes in my dreams. A woman screaming in the corner as she held her baby. A blood-soaked floor. A man laughing psychotically. The sound of knives sharpening, and briefly, the glimpse of a man strapped to a chair with black tape over his mouth, eyes bulging in horror as he witnessed a violent murder. There was little meaning to them, and there was no cohesion to the dreams. It was just glimpses. They were different, though, than any other dreams I had. They were short flashes like that of a slideshow, but they were incredibly vivid. I could describe in detail what the woman looked like and what she wore. I could hear her voice shrieking in terror. I could picture the blood on the floor and the man strapped to a chair as if I had just seen them in person. I could even smell the sickening scent of iron in the air from the blood. I told Sarah about the dreams. She didn't make much of them. She said they were likely the result of the anesthesia or my body healing from surgery and shouldn't be a concern. Anesthesia? I questioned. It's been a week. I think all the anesthesia is gone. Well, it could still be your body healing, she retorted. Or it could be anxiety. We've waited months for you to find a match. I'm sure you are worried about it failing. Also, you've always been terrified of doctors. This was true. I hated doctors. For years, doctors have been telling me I have hypertension when they take my blood pressure, only for me to explain I have white coat syndrome. Yeah, you're probably right, I said. I know I am. I always am, she said, smiling softly. No matter how distressed I was, that smile always calmed me. What else could it be? I nodded and reclined on the couch. It was Saturday, which meant it was movie night. Throughout our 23 years of marriage, we made it a point to have date nights as we got older and grew sheer. Most of those date nights turned into staying home and watching something. Still, I couldn't quite shake the unease I felt. I don't know how to describe it, but something felt wrong. Though I had relaxed my mind and resolved myself to just experiencing post-op anxiety that didn't stop the nightmares. In fact, they got worse. I no longer only dreamed of the same horror scene of the blood-soaked room. Now I would see different ones. Sometimes I would dream of a young man, maybe 30 with long black hair, being hung by one finger from a bridge, crying and begging for his life. I could hear his bones in his finger break and see the flesh tear as the thin rope cut into his finger. Other times, I would see a family, all tied to lawn chairs inside a barn as it went up in flames. I watched as they screamed as the flames engulfed them and melted the skin from their faces. One of the worst I saw was a woman held at gunpoint as her I assume boyfriend or husband shot himself in the head. I suspect whoever held the gun forced him to do it, or else he would kill his wife or girlfriend. They were all drastically different killings, but aside from being gruesome and horrific, they all had two things in common. There was always a man laughing maniacally, and there was always the man tied to a chair being forced to watch. This went on for weeks. I would tell my wife about the dreams, and though disturbed, she would always conclude that it must be anxiety or that I had watched too many horror films. "It's not just anxiety," I yelled during an argument over the dreams. "It's not horror movies either. I've watched horror my entire life and have never had dreams like this." "Well, what do you want to do about it then?" she retorted. I sat and clasped my head in my hands. I felt as if I may cry for the first time in decades. "I don't know, but I can't keep having dreams like this. I can barely sleep anymore. Should you see a therapist?" Sarah asked. "A therapist? How much is it going to cost for some PAAHDAAEDDDHEHE to tell me it's all because of my childhood?" I snidely responded. "Will you stop?" she said. "Your insurance covers therapy. Do you have any other ideas? Wouldn't you like to sleep again?" I sighed. I always thought of therapists as scams, but what other options did I have? These nightmares were making my life hell and went far beyond not being able to sleep. I couldn't get the images out of my mind. They were always there. Having constant, vivid images of the most gruesome murders possible really messed with one's psyche. "Fine. I'll look for one tomorrow." It didn't take long for me to find a psychiatrist. As it happens, America is experiencing something of a mental health epidemic. Psychiatrists were plentiful and abundant. I found one covered by my insurance with good reviews. A slender lady who looked to be somewhere in her mid-30s. I told her, the psychiatrist, all about my dreams and how I started experiencing them after the surgery. I explained that I could see them in vivid detail, and they were making my awakened life a nightmare. She went through the usual checklist. She asked if I had ever experienced anything like this before, if I had a history of anxiety, if I was on any painkillers after the surgery. I answered no to them all. She had no concrete answers, but she said it was likely that my brain was working out the trauma of literally dying for months with a failing kidney. She concluded that with death constantly lurking in my mind, it was likely that now that it was over, I was experiencing something like PTSD. I didn't really believe her, but she prescribed me some medications, one for anxiety and one for sleep. If I can finally sleep, I'll take whatever she gives me, I thought. As it turns out, the meds did nothing. Well, actually, I guess they did, because the nightmares only got worse. Every couple of days, I would experience a new episode in more graphic detail than the last. Two of them really struck me. One was a man crying, being forced to eat something raw. Even in my sleep, I could feel the bile rise in my throat. Whatever that was, it wasn't beef. The second was another man as he was shoved into a wood chipper. I'll spare you the details on that one. Still, as with all of them, there was always that haunting laughter and a man strapped to a chair who seemed to slightly change between each dream. He gradually became more worn in appearance and skinnier. I reckoned he had lost 50 pounds throughout all the nightmares. Nothing eased the terror that consumed my nights. I was lucky to get 2 hours of sleep. I spent most of the nights lying in bed awake, sweating profusely. These had turned into night terrors, and I could no longer stand them. I even tried sleeping during the day to see if that would help, but I would still have nightmares. My wife was no help. She insisted I keep seeing the therapist and taking the meds. I put my foot down and refused. Whatever was going on, therapy wasn't the solution. Since this ordeal began when I got my kidney transplant, I decided to start there. Only problem was I didn't know how to begin there. I had no clue what the cause of the dreams were or how the kidney was connected, but it's all I had. After all, what the hell could a kidney have to do with nightmares? I racked my brain trying to figure out what happened around that time. Had I seen some news story about a serial killer before the surgery? While I was unconscious in the hospital, were murder victims being treated that my subconscious picked up on? I investigated both of these and found nothing. Finally, with no other possible avenues, I decided to contact my doctor who had done the surgery. I wanted to know who the kidney came from, which, evidently, standard surgical doctors don't know. At first, he wanted to know why I wanted to know this, so I told him I wanted to send a gift to the family as a thank you for saving my life. Finally, after a longer than wanted conversation, he sent me some list with what looked like serial numbers through email. He told me which number sequence my kidney belonged to and told me to contact the doctor in charge of organ donations, the one who extracted them from the corpses. It took a while, but I finally got in touch with the doctor I was looking for. I gave him the same story I had given the other doctor, and also gave him the numbers of the donor I was looking for. He checked his database and came back with the name, Samuel Horn. This was the guy whose kidney I now carried, the man who saved my life. Though I had never heard the name before, something about it seemed so familiar. It was as if I had heard the name 1,000 times. I Googled the name, and it didn't take long for me to discover who he was. I live in Boston, which is where Samuel Horn was from as well. Evidently, he was an investigator who went missing 2 years ago with no trace. Upon investigating the police reports, his case went cold and he was listed as a missing person. That is, until a few months ago when he was found on the outskirts of Boston, lying dead in the snow. The cause of death: a single stab wound to the temple. It was a sad story, but none of that's what got me. What bothered me instead was that I instantly recognized him. He was the man from my dreams, the one strapped to a chair who was present during all the killings. My mind was racing. What do? I couldn't tell my wife about this. She would just think I was nuts. What would I even tell her? Honey, that kidney I got is haunted and belonged to an investigator who was murdered. I think I'm witnessing the murders he was forced to watch before he was killed. I paced around for hours. I must have smoked 2 packs of Marlboros during that time trying to decide what to do. Why is this happening? Why am I having these dreams? What could they mean? I thought to myself. The only explanation I could muster was that Samuel must have wanted me to see them. For some reason, he wanted me to have these nightmares. My guess is he was investigating a serial killer, and he wanted me to finish it, to turn this person in, as he was unable. How I, a 49-year-old electrician, would do this, I don't know. Maybe eventually, I would see the laughing man in the nightmares. Then I would at least know what he looked like to tell the police. Until then, I would just have to endure them. It's not as if I had a choice in the matter anyway. Weeks passed with no relief. Every night, I would dream of some horrible murder, each more vivid than the last. I was never able to see the laughing man, though. He always stayed somewhere out of my limited view. That is, until one night, exactly 9 months after my surgery, I saw him. And I was not prepared for it. It happened abruptly. I was having a nightmare of a man being lit on fire when, suddenly, the laughing man popped into my view, clear as day. I was only able to see the man for a few moments before I jumped awake with my heart pounding. As I felt the drumming in my chest, I thought I might have a heart attack. I started to hyperventilate when my wife awoke. "Honey, what's wrong?" she yelled. I didn't reply. I was in disbelief. The man I saw, He was me. I never went back to sleep. It took over an hour for me to convince my wife I didn't need to call 911. I stayed awake the entire night thinking about what I had witnessed. How have I been killing people? I thought to myself. As soon as my wife awoke the next morning, I told her about the dream. She brushed it off as nothing and just a nightmare, but I insisted. I told her all about Samuel Horn and how he was the man I saw tied up in every one of my dreams. She was visibly shaken, but she still tried to make sense of it. She told me I should take a vacation and lay out of work for a while, rest my mind. I refused. I already knew what I was going to do, and that was turn myself into the police. I don't know how I was doing these murders, but I saw myself there. Initially, the police thought I was crazy. That is, until I gave them details of dozens of murders that the public had no information on. They checked their records, and all the information I gave them was accurate. Still, there was no evidence of my involvement in the murders, so instead of prison, I was locked in a psychiatric hospital. I spent weeks in this hospital. The nightmares had finally stopped. The doctors and the police weren't entirely convinced I was the murderer, but they knew I knew something and wanted to know how. I told them it was my dreams, which nobody took seriously. They eventually diagnosed me with schizophrenia and wanted to check my family history for mental illnesses. I told them about my family, which turned up nothing. No history of any mental issues aside from an uncle with chronic depression. That is until one of the officers sat me down for an interview. "John, are you aware you are adopted?" The officer inquired. "Adopted?" I asked. "No, I am not adopted." "Well, as it turns out, you are." I was shocked, as if I needed more life-altering news. I felt a tinge of sadness for a moment as I realized my parents weren't my biological mother and father. "Your parents adopted you when you were 4 months old. Apparently, your birth mother couldn't care for you both." "You both?" I asked. My head started to spin. This, along with everything else, was too much. "Yes, you both. John, you have an identical twin brother who is wanted on federal charges." Story 2. The light switches in my house are on the wrong walls. I've lived in this house for the past 23 years. Just like the past 8,000 nights, as I was going to bed, I reached out to turn off the light switch in the stairwell. The one right at the top of the stairs, on the left-hand side as I go up. Except it wasn't there. I stopped and looked down. My hand was pressed against blank wall. I turned around and saw the switch on the other side of the stairwell. Huh? Had the switch always been on that side? It had been so long, I'd never really paid attention to where exactly the light switch was. It was pure muscle memory. Reach out. Turn off the light. Go into my bedroom. I looked down. Oh, I was holding a freshly laundered sheet and pillowcase in my left hand. That stopped me from turning off the light. Instead of switching hands, my muscle memory just told my brain, "Hey, go ahead and turn off the light with your other hand." Silly brain. There was nothing wrong. I opened the door to my bedroom and started pulling the fitted sheet over the mattress. I pulled the cloth straight, straightening out the wrinkles, neatly tucking the corners underneath. I repeated it 4 times, then with a sigh, got up and went into the bathroom. I reached to flick on the light blank wall. What the? I extended my other arm. After a second of fumbling, my fingers found the switch and flipped it on. I scowled at myself in the mirror, at the reflection of my bony hand, frozen on the light switch. I'm pretty sure the light switch was on the other side. next to the towel rack. Not there. I walked over to the counter and pulled the bobby pins out of my hair, then pulled it all up into a ponytail, securing it with a neon green hairtie. I reached down for the drawer to pull out my toothpaste, except my fingers grabbed empty air. I looked down to find the drawer pull a few inches lower than I expected it to be. Geez, what's wrong with me today? I muttered under my breath. I grabbed my toothpaste out of the drawer, squirted it on my toothbrush, and furiously brushed my teeth. I bent over the sink and cupped my hands, filling them with water. I sucked it up, swishing, and spit it out. Straightened back up. Huh? Over my shoulder in the mirror, the fitted sheets sat bunched up on top of the mattress. My heart dropped. I definitely put the sheet on. Then I frowned. Did I, or did I just think about doing it? I turned around, staring at the bunched fabric, the cute little green polka dots distorted with the wrinkles. Then I shook my head and walked over to the bed, flapped the sheet in the air, then lined up the corners, pulled it taut, tucking each corner underneath. Looking good, I walked over to the windows and closed them, locked them, pulled down the blinds, then pulled the curtains over them. Without the light of the moon, the room was pitch dark, save for the sliver of golden light spilling out from the bathroom door. Leaving the bathroom light on so I wouldn't trip over myself, I sat down on the bed and turned on the desk lamp, pulled my Kindle off the nightstand and opened the novel I'd been reading. Some dramedy about two very different women switching bodies. I read for several minutes, but then something caught my eye. The mirror. In the full-length mirror across from the bed, I could see my reflection, blankets cozily wrapped around me, cup of water on the nightstand, Kindle in hand. Except there was something horribly, horribly wrong. My hair was down. No, I put my hair up in a ponytail. In the bathroom. I was sure of it otherwise. I would have gotten my hair wet in the sink when I brushed my teeth. Unless, maybe I absent-mindedly put it back down while I was reading. The neon green hairtie sat on the nightstand. I grabbed it and quickly put my hair back up. Then I stared at the mirror. My reflection stared back, eyes wide. You're just tired. You've had a hell of a day. Hell of a week. The presentation at work. Fixing the cracked window in the basement all by yourself. You just need a good sleep. I reached over and turned off the lamp. Darkness enveloped me, and it felt, somehow, too dark. Usually there was light from something, even if it was just the blinking white light from my laptop, indicating sleep mode. But this was just pure darkness. Thick, heavy darkness like a fog, filling the entire room. Go to sleep. You need sleep. I cuddled up to my pillow, closed my eyes, and began to fall asleep, my eyes shot open. The light. I'd left the light on in the bathroom, and now it was off. I pulled myself up out of bed. Hello. Is anyone there? Oh, good idea, Hannah. Announce yourself like every victim in a slasher movie ever. Groping in the darkness, I felt for my phone. I'd left it on the nightstand, which should have been a foot or two to my right. But as I continued to feel, my hand only fell on empty air. Where the hell is the nightstand? I walked forward with slow, halting steps. Then my toe collided with something. I hissed in pain, but reached down and finally found the sleek, smooth metal of my phone. I turned on the flashlight, and my blood ran cold. My bed. The nightstand. It was all on the left side of the room, not the right. I stared at it, my heart pounding in my chest. The white light jittered across the wall as my hand shook. I turned around, towards the bathroom, but I was staring at the windows. The curtains closed tight. I whipped around, and there was the door to the bathroom on the other side of the room. What the fuck? I ran to the bedroom door, turned the knob, swung the door open, and raced down the hallway the stairs. They didn't lead down. They led up. My flashlight followed the wooden steps as they went up, turned 90 degrees at the landing, and then continued upwards. At the top, there was a shut door. A door I'd seen 1,000,000 times. The door to my basement. A dream. This has got to be a dream. I pinched myself, screamed, tried to force myself awake, but I was still standing in the hallway that led up to the basement door. I raced up the stairs and opened the door, or tried to. It only opened a few inches before the chain lock caught. I thrust my entire weight against the door, pulling the chain taut, but the door wouldn't open any further. Let me out. Light blinked on the other side of the door, and through the crack, I could see something familiar. A hallway with a cuckoo clock, cream-colored walls, an opening that led to a small, wallpapered kitchen. It was my house, and standing in the kitchen was a woman with dark hair pulled back with a neon green ponytail holder. Me. She held a toolbox and a garbage bag. Something like glass clanked against each other with each step she took. Then she disappeared around the bend, towards the garage. Help, I screamed. Help me. But no one came. I've tried calling the police. Tried calling my mom, my friends, anyone. It never goes through, though. It seems like I have some sort of internet connection, though, and I'm not even sure where this will be seen. But I hope someone will see it. Story 3. I work at a small-town McDonald's. My manager makes us follow a strange set of rules. I'll have a number 4 meal with extra cheese, 2 Big Macs with a large fry, 3 apple pies, and a shamrock shake. All right, Stan. Your total comes out to $46.50. The land whale grunted approvingly as he shoved a greasy wad of crumpled bills into Gary's outstretched palm. Here's your change. I'll call your number when it's ready. Stan trundled away to await his late-night snack as Gary and I prepared the food. Geez, man, does he have a family waiting at home or something? I whispered as Gary shoveled fries into a red and yellow box. Blair, does that man look like he's got a wife and kids? Stan is one of our regulars. You'll see him pretty often if you stick with the night shift. I grimaced as I prepared the shake. Great. Lucky me. Hey, it could be a lot worse. Honestly, Stan is the least of your worries, he said as a shudder rippled through his body. We processed the remainder of the food in silence. Gary and I then shuffled to the counter, each donning a full tray. Stan, orders up. Gary exclaimed as the boulder of a man darted at an alarming speed to retrieve his sodium-rich smorgasbord. He snatched the trays from us, hurriedly ambling back to his corner table. I watched in astonishment as the man inhaled his meal. Hey, could you help me sweep in the back? Best to do it now before any more customers. Gary was interrupted by an obnoxiously loud alarm blaring from his pocket. Stan looked up at him, glowering at the unwelcome ringing. Sorry. Gotta take this, he said, darting to the kitchen and out of view. He returned a moment later. All the color had drained from his face. He appeared sickly, like he'd suddenly caught a nasty case of the flu. That was my Aunt Norma. She said my parents were in a car wreck. Apparently, my mom is in critical condition. He stared off into space, his brain slowly processing the tragic information it had just received. Gary, I'm so sorry. Do you need me to call someone? He snapped out of his trance, tears brimming in the corners of his eyes. He quickly wiped them away. No, I'll be fine. Okay. But with all due respect, what are you still doing here? Go be with your family, dude. I can handle closing up on my own. He locked eyes with me, a stern determination creeping over his countenance. You're right. I need to go. Here, take my key to the restaurant. There's a list of rules in Dave's office. Go read them the first chance you get. You need to follow them to a T, no matter how ridiculous they sound, got it? Yep, I'll take care of it. Now go. I said as Gary handed me a small silver object. He sprinted out the front door, letting it slam shut behind him. I fashioned Gary's drive-through headset below my hat and headed to the back to familiarize myself with the nighttime protocols. I laboriously pushed open the door to Dave's office. You'd think the thing was made from solid gold with how heavy it was. I surveyed my surroundings, my eyes immediately falling to the life-sized portrait beaming back at me. Really, Dave? Even I'm not that self-absorbed, I muttered, continuing my search. I defaulted to the pockmarked bulletin board to my right. There they were, posted clear as day. I swiftly scanned over them. Rules for the night shift: 1, you are allowed a 7-minute grace period. No exceptions. 2, if a hooded figure knocks at the drive-through window, do not answer it. Stay out of its direct line of sight, and it will leave. 3, if Stan claims that you forgot his pickles, offer him a free complimentary chocolate shake. If he refuses, lock yourself in the office and call Dave. For no outside food or drink. 5, if a blood-like substance begins seeping from under the grill, mop it up until it stops. No, it is not blood. 6, an old woman in a shawl will come in exactly 10 minutes past 1. Avoid looking at her for too long. She will not leave until you ask her where Tony is. 7, if a small child appears telling you he lost his mother, ignore him. He does not have good intentions. 8, you are required to comply with the employee dress code. Speak to management if you need clarification on what is acceptable. 9, if you are alone and you feel the undeniable sensation of being watched, lock yourself in the office immediately and wait for it to dissipate. 10, the store closes at 2 a.m. before you clock out. Place 2 packages of raw burgers on the stove. 11, always leave the restaurant by 2:37 a.m. The Hamburglar doesn't like company. 12, failure to adhere to these rules will result in immediate termination. Do not hesitate to call Dave if you have any questions or concerns. Dave's phone number was hastily scrawled at the bottom of the page. I stared at the list, unsure of what to make of it. Was this some sort of cruel prank on the newbie? Maybe Gary was in on it. I resolved to wait and find out for myself, and I made my way back to the counter. Upon seeing me approach, Stan rapidly stood from his seat and sidled up to me. Can I help you with something? Yeah. You forgot my pickles. I mentally rolled my eyes. Gary hadn't been gone for 10 minutes, and the fun was already ramping up. Look, I watched my coworker make those. I know he didn't, I began, before Rule 3 crept into my head. I mean, I'm sorry. I can offer you a free shake for the inconvenience. His 4 chins flapped as he fervently shook his head. No, I don't want any more food. There is another way you could make it up to me, though. A malicious grin inched across his face. A blanket of fear sent adrenaline bursting through my veins. I'm 16, sir. If you really think that's not what I meant, you dumb broad. I want a refund. What? No, you already ate it all. Fine. If you won't give me my money back, I'll have to take it from you. The massive mound of flesh began waddling to meet me behind the counter. I fled to the back, praying he wouldn't catch me. I glanced behind me as I struggled to push open the absurdly heavy office door. Stan was barreling toward me, sending shelves of product crashing to the ground. My heart thumped against my ribcage so hard that it hurt. I had just managed to slip through the door and slam it shut when he reached it. Thud. He pounded his ape-like fists against the sturdy metal frame, shouting obscenities at me all the while. "I'll get you, you little whore. You can't stay in there forever." He was right. I instantly ripped the yellowing piece of paper from the board and punched in Dave's number. He picked up after an agonizingly long minute of waiting. "Hello? This had better be good. I value my beauty sleep, Dave. It's Stan. The free shake didn't work. I'm trapped in the office." Dave sighed. "All right, put it on speaker and hold your phone up to the door so he can hear me," I obliged, clenching my cracked iPhone 7 with a vice grip and sticking it close to the rattling door. "Stan? Stan, can you hear me?" "It's Dave." The room fell eerily silent. "Oh yeah, what's up, Davey?" "Stan, are you harassing one of my employees again? I don't need to get Mrs. Barrett on the phone, do I?" No, please. I'll behave, I swear. Please, just don't call her." His voice trembled as he spoke. "I don't know. That's what you said the last time. I promise I'll never bother her again." "Come on, Davy. Show a little compassion." Dave took a moment to respond. "All right. But I need you to go home, and you need to apologize to Mrs. Blake for scaring her, Blair," I interjected, facepalming myself. "Right. Apologize to Blair, and I'll let you off the hook." "Oh, thank you. Sorry, Blaze. So, can I take you up on that free shake?" "No, Stan. No free shake tonight. I need you to leave," Dave said, a stern finality in his statement. Without another word, Stan angrily tromped through the kitchen and out the front door. I didn't release my breath until I heard it shut behind him. "Thanks, Dave. Any time, kid." In my experience, threatening to call his mother is a decent deterrent for any overgrown man-baby, I chuckled, sensing the tension disperse. "I'm gonna get back to bed now. Good luck tonight." And with that, he abruptly hung up. I sat for a moment, controlling my breathing in order to steady my palpitating heart before returning to my duties. I trudged into the kitchen and begrudgingly got to work cleaning the mess of boxes and condiments that Stan had strewn throughout the area. I had just put the final ketchup bottle in its place when out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A figure was standing at the drive-through window. I immediately tensed up, every muscle in my body freezing in place. It glared at me, yellow glowing eyes piercing the darkness. It raised a gloved fist and knocked lightly on the thin glass. The sound freed me from my stupor. Rule 2. I dashed to the counter and crouched behind it, hugging my knees to my chest. Ice flooded my veins as the knocking grew louder. The window shook in its frame as the light knock soon escalated to rapid pounding. I squeezed my eyes shut, terrified at the notion that the slim barrier to the outside world wouldn't hold. The constant noise assaulted my eardrums, crashing against them like thunder during a storm. The knocking crescendoed into a fever pitch of resounding slams. Just when I thought that I might lose my sanity, it stopped. I glanced up in the midst of the unsettling silence I found myself in. It was gone, as if the entity had never appeared in the first place. I gradually stood and took my time getting my bearings. I hesitantly peeked around the corner at the drive-through. Nothing, not so much as a scratch on the glass. I glanced down at my phone. 12:15 a.m. less than 2 hours. I could handle it, right? I began sweeping like Gary was beginning to ask me to do prior to receiving his unfortunate news. I was thankful for a break in the action. I didn't know how much more I could take. Apparently, I could take a lot more, as I came to find out. A couple of college kids stumbled in, trying to hide the fact that they were obviously stoned out of their minds, and retrieved a pickup order. I watched as they clumsily staggered out the door. One of them held it politely for a small old lady. An old lady wearing a shawl. She didn't utter so much as a thank you, beelining up to the register with purpose. I was exhausted, up well past my normal operating hours, so I had completely forgotten about the rules. Big mistake. The woman glowered up at me, face obscured from view. Her head covering was black as well as the rest of her outfit, not unlike a ninja you'd see in a movie. The aura she radiated frightened me, but not enough to release me from my sleepy haze. "Hello, how can I help you?" I yawned, lazily covering my mouth. The woman didn't move a muscle. She scowled at me, yellow reptilian eyes piercing my psyche and sending my heart into overdrive. "Ma'am, would you like to order something?" Nothing. The longer we continued our staring match, the more sedated I felt, and not just due to the lack of sleep. She had some sort of strange pull over me. I nearly nodded off, my mind wandering back to the instructions. Before I passed out, I murmured, "Where's Tony?" Suddenly, I was released from my trance, and the woman was nowhere to be found, like she had simply vanished into thin air. My eyes widened. That was close. Too close. I trudged to the sink and splashed some cool water in my face, then poured myself a large cup of coffee. I knew it would probably keep me up well past closing, but hey, if it helped me avoid another incident like that, I was all for it. I had just finished dumping the dustpan into the trash when I felt it. A peculiar sensation crept over me like bugs crawling on the back of my neck. I was being watched. But from where? I sensed it coming from the drive-thru. I whipped my head in its direction. Empty. It shifted to the dining area. No one was there. I grew lightheaded, and panic began to surge through my system. A breeze swept past my ear, and I swear I could hear a soft, almost imperceptible voice whisper, "Blair." I bolted to the office, slamming the door shut as quickly as I could. What was that? I paced around the office like a caged animal, anxiously waiting for something, anything to happen. After what felt like an eternity, it began to dissipate without incident. I sat there for a moment, contemplating if this was really the right career path for me. Was every night like this? I was snapped back to reality by static emanating from my headset. I ripped it off until the noise stopped. A bumbling male voice crackled through it. "Hey, is this place open?" He slurred, obviously under the influence. "Yeah. What do you want to order?" I was beginning to lose my cool. Between all the strange occurrences and the inebriated customers, my patience was wearing thin. "I'll have a filet-o-fish meal, coming right up." I made my way back to the kitchen and began preparing his order. Who the hell comes to McDonald's at 1:30 in the morning for a freaking filet-o-fish? I grumbled, purposely dousing his sandwich in sauce. I served the man, hoping to be rid of him as soon as possible. "Thanks." "Hey, is that a kid at the counter?" I turned my head, and sure enough, there he was. A mess of blonde tangles and deep blue eyes peered at me from the register. I sighed. "Yeah, I'll take care of him. Have a good night, a child. Unaccompanied in my restaurant. Just what I needed." I began to approach the counter when Rule 7 blared in my mind like a tornado siren. I froze mid-stride. "Just ignore him, Blair. It's almost 2. You got this," I reassured myself, starting my closing duties early. That was easier said than done. The child began wailing, shrill high-pitched screams reverberating off the walls. He ran into the kitchen area, allowing me a full view of his tiny frame. The boy couldn't have been older than 6. His Pac-Man t-shirt looked well outdated, and he was filthy, as if he hadn't showered in years. He began tugging on my shirt, begging for attention. "Please help me, lady. I can't find my mommy," he cried, tears streaming down his rosy cheeks. He was relentlessly pulling at my clothing. That was it. I'd reached my breaking point. If this child, monster, demon, whatever he was, planned on killing me, he could go ahead and put me out of my misery. I was done. "Get out. Just screw off and leave me the hell alone." He immediately quit sniffling and straightened up as if I'd flipped a switch. Red tinged his striking pupils. Dread began sinking into my gut. A malicious grin blossomed across his lips. "You made the right choice," he growled as he headed toward the exit. "Weirdo kid," I mumbled, returning to cleaning. I finished up and waited around for 2 to hit, praying for a quiet, uneventful end to my first nightmare closing shift. Of course, my prayers went unanswered. I had a mere 3 minutes until I was supposed to clock out when I spotted it. A dark red viscous liquid oozing from beneath the stove. Great. Awesome. Just what I needed. I filled up a mop bucket in the storage closet and began sopping up the mystery fluid. If it wasn't blood, you could have fooled me. A persistent copper taste assaulted my tongue every time I opened my mouth. I gagged, forcing vomit back down my throat. The stuff just wouldn't stop coming. On my 3rd bucket full of slushing crimson, I finally started gaining an upper hand. I mopped fervently as blisters erupted across my hands from the friction of the wooden handle. All the not blood had been disposed of. I breathed a sigh of relief, careful to avoid splashing myself as I dumped the last of it down the drain. I'd done it. Take that, bitches. I win. I cheered as if I just claimed first prize at the Indy 500. My celebration was short-lived once I glanced down at my phone. 2:35 a.m. I bolted to the freezer, scooping up a couple bags of frozen patties. I slashed them open as quickly as I could, hoping in vain that I'd be able to make it out in time. I dumped their contents on the grill, then turned to toss the packaging in the trash. My heart plummeted into my gut. A man stood before me. His black dead eyes matched that of the small mask encompassing the top half of his face. Wispy red hair sprouted from his floppy hat. A matching tattered black and white striped uniform framed his features, accompanied by a dingy red tie dotted with images of burgers. He grinned at me, jagged rotten teeth sending a chill undulating through my entire body. He spoke, a rough gravelly voice shattering the tense silence. "Look, I know you're new here, so I'll spare you this time. But if I ever catch you in here this late again, I won't think twice about increasing my calorie intake." His wicked smile exuded a malevolent hunger that still haunts my nightmares. A wet gray tongue wormed its way around his cracked, withered lips. I felt like a mouse about to be devoured by a rattlesnake. He scowled at me. "What are you still doing here? Get out." I suddenly regained my mobility. I tore through the dining area and burst into the cool night air. The Hamburglar's soulless stare followed me into the vacant parking lot. I hurriedly locked him inside and raced to my car as a torrent of emotions flooded through me at once. Fear, anger, and confusion were all prominent on my desolate drive home. In the end, rage won out. I wasn't scheduled the next day, but I was determined to make that smug prick in charge at least give me some sort of explanation. I returned to the Golden Arches around 4 hours later, running on 0 sleep and a whole pot of Maxwell House. With fire in my eyes, I flung the door open and marched straight to Dave's office. Oh yeah, it was great. Had his car repossessed and everything. Oh, hey Blitz. Uh-huh. Yep. For the last freaking time, it's Blair. Blair. Not Blitzen. Not Blaziken. Not Blakely. Blair. Dave furrowed his brow, mouth slightly agape. Yeah, Jim. I'll have to get back to you. He ended the call and furiously pocketed his phone. Do you even know who that was? I mean, why the hell do you think you can just storm into my office like this? No, you listen to me, Davy boy. I just had the worst night of my life. Every weird thing that could have happened, happened. And you don't care one bit. I see you've become acquainted with our more troublesome clientele. Yeah, I have. And I'm not dealing with that crap again. I quit, I hissed, dramatically slapping my hat onto his polished cedarwood desk before turning to walk out the door. Wait. 25 an hour. I stopped dead in my tracks. I reluctantly faced him. A sly, toothy grin was stamped on his greasy face. I mulled it over. That was almost double what I was currently making. I could have my college paid for in no time. 27, and you've got a deal. You drive a hard bargain, Mrs. Blair. I accept, he said, extending his hand. I begrudgingly shook it, cringing as his sweaty palm gripped mine. I'm glad you were able to see reason. Welcome to the night crew. Story 4. I'm the sole survivor of a roller coaster that couldn't be stopped for 12 hours. Last year, I learned a lesson I will never forget. Trust your gut. I had the day off from work. I wanted to do something fun, but everyone I knew was busy. Makes sense. I mean, it was a Tuesday. I decided I'd just go to the amusement park by myself. I've done it before and had a great time. I'm a bit of a thrill seeker. Well, not too much anymore. Going 5 miles over the speed limit is about all the excitement I want out of life anymore. I got to the park at around p.m. It was slow, even for a Tuesday. It gave me a sense of excitement because I knew I'd be able to ride a lot of rides without having to be there all day. At the same time, it gave me a weird, uncanny feeling. All this space and not enough people to fill it up. I ignored the feeling and moved on. I don't know about you, but whenever I go to an amusement park, I like to work my way up to the really crazy rides. I'll start small and finish off the day with my favorite. My favorite just happened to be called the Grim Reaper. It feels a little too on the nose, doesn't it? It was 7:30 p.m., and the park closed at p.m., and I knew it was time to get in line for my final ride. I also made a new friend while there. We met standing in line at one of my first rides of the day. We decided after chatting the whole time in line that we'd hang out for the rest of the day. His name was Charlie. We agreed on every ride that day, except for the last. He wanted to end the night on the Mindbinder, but after some convincing aka, the Mindbinder's line was way shorter while passing by, we decided to do the Grim Reaper last. We got in line for the Grim Reaper, and there was hardly anyone in line. It made sense, given that it was almost closing time. Do you think they will let us ride multiple times if the line stays down? Charlie said with his hands clasped excitedly in front of him. I just smiled at him and chuckled. Normally, I would have been excited too, but something in my gut felt so off. For some reason, I didn't want to go on one of my favorite rides. Maybe it was the 5 corn dogs I ate a couple hours earlier, I figured. I'm a very rational person. I wasn't the kind of person to let anxiety or worry rule over me. I always thought life was just what you made of it. When we got in line, there were about 60 people, give or take. The people in front of us did their ride, and 30 of us were left in line. People started looking at the time and saying they were tired and just getting out of line. By the time it was our turn, only 19 people were in line. I knew the ride well enough to remember that it held 20 people, So if no one else got in line, they really might let us go multiple times. I really didn't want that though. Honestly, I felt even more compelled to get out of line after all those others did too. And I didn't want to seem lame to my new friend if I wanted to get off the coaster after one ride. The time came for us to get on the ride. My heart was pounding faster than it ever had. I wondered if I was all worked up because I watched Final Destination 3 with a friend a couple weeks back. But I wasn't having visions of the terrible fate we would all face. I was just feeling off. I did everything in my power to get it to all make sense and to not worry, but nothing worked. I seriously considered just telling Charlie I didn't feel great after the last ride, but I finally found someone with my taste in roller coasters. I didn't want to let him down. We were towards the back of the line, so we didn't have much say in where we sat. We ended up in the third car from the front. I was just happy we weren't in the front car. As you get on the Grim Reaper, it plays a cheesy little jingle. Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The Grim Reaper will find you dead or alive, with music in the background that always sounded so dumb in the past. I couldn't believe it was getting to me. Charlie even hummed along to it while grabbing my arm with happiness. We got in our seats, and an employee came by and pulled down the metal bar restraint to secure us in our seats. It was the kind that strapped you individually over your shoulder. I'm on the chubbier side, but I can always fit into coaster seats. I've never been told I couldn't go on a ride. I'm just sometimes a little snug. It's actually kind of nice because I feel very secure. As we got strapped in, I felt the plastic-coated metal hit my shoulders and chest. It should have given me a sense of comfort and safety, but I just felt trapped. The employee walked back to the station that has the infamous big button that starts the ride. He flashed all a thumbs up and yelled, "Ready for the Reaper?" Everyone raised their hands and let out an excited scream. Except for me. I let out a large sigh, counting down the seconds, trying to imagine Charlie and I once we were off the ride and how happy we would be. The employee hit the button and we were off. The coaster shot out of the loading station like we were a bullet being shot out of a gun. After that, it started on a relatively slow ascent up a point to a drop off of 60 degrees, a couple of twists and turns, a big loop, and some more twists and turns. About halfway through the ride, I was enjoying myself. I was thinking about how the hard part was done, and I was safe. Just a little anxiety was all. We were rounding out our last bend when a sense of relief came over me. I could see the end of the ride. I was almost done, but the ride didn't start to slow down. Normally, the coaster starts to slowly come to a full stop several hundred feet from the end, but it was still going. As we passed by the loading area, I saw the operators look confused as we raced by. I noticed no one else was waiting in line. Someone screamed, "One more time," and everyone on board gave an excited response. Everyone except for me. Charlie looked over at me and grabbed my wrist. Yes, I knew they would let us keep going. This is awesome. He let out an excited yelp as we reached the climb to the drop. He was beaming with joy the whole rest of the lap. We passed by the loading area once again, but this time the coaster operator had a couple other people standing with him. The operator who strapped us looked red and worried. As we were whipped by the employees for our third ride of the day, the other riders were divided. Some were still excited, screaming, "Let's go. One more time." Or "Best day ever." Yeah. Some people started to sound scared. Not everyone noticed the employees looking frazzled. I can promise you one thing. I noticed. We started going up the incline again. This was the slowest part of the ride, at around 10 miles per hour, and slowing down a little as it reached its peak. This gave us opportunities to take a breath or try to talk, although it was only for a total of about 20 seconds. Are we stuck? I said nervously to Charlie. I'm sure we are fine. There is just a malfunction with the electrical system, not activating the brakes or something. There is always a manual shut off. He was cut off, and we went down the steep hill. We passed by yet again, this time with more people looking worried, and someone standing close to where the coaster would go by. He tried to yell at us as we went by, but we couldn't really understand him. Maybe something about them working on getting us off. This time, as we zoomed by, everyone was scared and starting to panic. I guess it didn't sink in for some people what was happening until right now. We went around a 5th time, and everything remained the same. On the 6th time, we were at the peak and saw a fire truck coming into the parking lot. From the top of the incline, we had a perfect view of the parking lot, along with the side of a highway a little further out. It took 2 more loops around the track by the time the fire department got to us. Not just them, but police officers and ambulances. It started to scare me. Why did they get ambulances? Is it just protocol, or is there more to this? Someone came in a few minutes later with a big white board that they used to write messages to us. The ride was too loud when passing by them to hear anything, so this was their only way to talk to us. It must have been the 12th or 13th time around when the whiteboard read, "Trying to free you at peak." I knew they couldn't write a novel for us because you can only read so much while going by so fast. But come on, people, what is it supposed to mean? I think they just wanted to tell us they were working on a way to get us down, but that didn't matter. We had been on this ride for nearly 30 minutes, and we felt sick, and our bodies hurt like crazy. A couple loops after that, we saw a fire truck trying to get underneath where the top of the ascent was. Luckily, there was a large space where the truck could pull right beside it. Unfortunately, at its peak, it's about 200 feet in the air. It also didn't have any emergency exits at the top, like most coasters do. You'd think that would be a requirement, but what do I know? We saw the fire truck start to expand the ladder that comes out the top, but it wasn't even close. We waited for the firefighters to try and figure out a solution to save us, as the audience below us was watching us like we were some kind of show. It was close to 45 minutes when the first death occurred, then one more soon after. There was a skinnier guy in a car behind me. I heard him talking about trying to slip out of the seat restraint, which secured him to his seat. The other guy he was with told him it was a bad idea. So did I. The next time we went up the ascent, he began violently wiggling and thrashing back and forth, to the point where people thought he was going to throw off the ride. He managed to wiggle about halfway out, right at the top. But, well, it didn't end very well. His leg got caught on a part of the track and yanked the rest of his body out of the bar restraint. It sent his body crashing down towards the earth. However, I think he was dead soon after he was ripped out of his seat. I didn't see too much of it, but the guy who was beside him let out an insane screech. Hearing the kind of agony as you are feeling the harsh effects of gravity hitting on your chest while going down a steep hill was truly mortifying. The screech out of nowhere stopped, and more people screamed. The man beside him had a heart attack. I could hear the symphony of moans and crying coming from the crowd watching us. I couldn't hear them before because of how loud the ride was, but they were terrified of what they saw. Police tried to escort them out of the park, but it didn't stop people from parking on the side of the road to watch and record on their phones. It made me feel disgusted. At around an hour on the ride, everyone stopped screaming or trying to talk to each other. It seemed like everyone accepted their fate. My nails were deeply embedded into Charlie's wrist. I couldn't scream anymore due to my throat feeling raw from the yelling. Even if I wanted to, I probably couldn't due to my voice giving out. I saw that I drew a little blood on Charlie, but he was too out of it to notice. He, along with a few other people, were incredibly sick. He threw up probably 5 times by this point and looked cross-eyed. Around that time, the electricity in the whole park shut down. All the lights, everything. I think they were hoping a hard reboot of the whole park would stop the ride. The coaster didn't just rely on gravity, but also on a lot of help from motors and other electronic elements. It all turned off when we were on the straightaway. Of course, it still didn't stop. I could hear someone yelling with frustration, not understanding how it could still be moving if it didn't have an electrical source. After 2 hours, they let some family members come into the loading area, which was a terrible idea. We were doing our best to keep cool and stay calm. Our families watching us, zooming by them every 2 minutes, and absolutely screaming at us, made it so much worse. My mom was my first family member to show up. Don't get me wrong. I love my mom, but she is very stubborn and wanted something done even though they had already tried everything. Of course, it was just because she wanted me safe, but it was stressing me out. The firefighters put down a safety net underneath the ascent. It was still quite a jump if we could even get out successfully to land on it. And we might be okay, but we were all a little scarred from what happened before. It seemed like they put it out just in case someone tried to get out again. It didn't seem like it was the plan to have us all just jump out of that moving death machine. They weren't desperate enough at that point. We saw a large group of people passionately arguing and yelling at each other. From what I could tell, it was made up of family members, firefighters, and some employees of the park. I'm sure with lots of varying opinions. The ride was on hour 3. When the coaster entered the loading area once again, I saw a woman run over to the control panel. A couple people ran over to her and told her to stop and not press the button. She was screaming her head off and wailing. It had been hard to understand people in the past while going by them, but this was as clear as day. As we passed by, I could tell she was starting to break free from the grip of people holding her back. I wasn't too worried. Whatever button she was wanting to press, I'm sure it wouldn't work, since none of the other ones worked so far. We were about 5 seconds away from going down the descent when we heard a click come from all our seats. The woman hit the button that unlocked all our overhead seat belts. Of course, the seat belt button worked, but not the button to stop the ride. A few people reacted fast enough to either jump out or snap it back over themselves before the ride went down. Others weren't so lucky. 3 people managed to jump out, but didn't survive the fall. Despite there now being a giant net to catch anyone who was dumb enough to try and get out that high, one person hit a support beam on the way down, and the other 2 landed wrong when they hit the net. Their bodies folded in an unnatural manner as they hit. All 3 died instantly. I would say around half of us that were left managed to get the seatbelt secured before going down the hill. Everyone else had to hold on for dear life. And unfortunately, I was one of them. I felt my stomach start to drop as I reached up to grab the only thing that would keep me from becoming a part of the pavement below. The restraint wasn't completely useless at this point. I just had a good 12 inches in between my chest and the restraint. As I dug my fingers into the plastic, I hoped I would be fine. Then the ride dropped. I felt my butt lift off the seat I had become so familiar with. I tried to wrap my ankles around the floor of the coaster to keep the rest of my body from flying out. Charlie luckily got the restraint down, so he was trying to get his leg over mine and hold me down with his arm. After the longest 5 seconds of my life, I managed to pull it back down over my chest. I wasn't sure who else got theirs down, but I assumed From how scared a few of them sounded, it wasn't good. All I could think about and look at was the big loop coming up. As we got closer, I could hear swearing from multiple passengers, including someone in front of me. She was violently pulling at the restraint, but it just wasn't budging. I was hoping and praying that the centrifugal force would keep her in her seat. As we went around the big loop, I closed my eyes. I knew I didn't want to see what was about to happen. I heard multiple people screaming and making horrendous cracking sounds. I don't have an exact number, but I would say only 7 people were left. I could see the 2 people in the very front row and Charlie beside me. I recall only hearing 3 other voices behind me at this point. At hour 5, 3 more people died while on the ride. 2 of them from a heart attack or something. The third person, well, he watched the person beside him suddenly die while going around one of the bends. He yelled out in anger, and well, I'd actually rather not go into detail. But he died soon after. I saw the whole thing. They were the 2 people left in front of me and Charlie. At hour 6, we saw a group of people bringing in what looked like another large net, except that it was in the loading area. The next time we looped around, they wrote something new on the big white board. We are going to try and stop it manually. I had no clue what this meant, but by the look of the net, I was terrified. The next pass, there were people on both sides of the loading area. On one side, the net was wrapped around a large pole that had been somehow fastened into the concrete slab. I saw a large similar pole on the other side, but the net wasn't yet attached. As we zoomed by, I could hear people trying to rush and hurry behind us. We went around one of the turns, and I cranked my neck, looking to see what plan they had in mind. They were frantically trying to tie the other side of the net to the support beam that was freshly drilled into the ground. I couldn't believe how stupid these people were. How on earth did they think this was a good idea? Was this a last-ditch attempt? I was yelling at them and telling them to stop, but of course they couldn't hear me. Even if they could, they wouldn't listen. They were desperate to get at least someone out of this alive. Or maybe the owner of the park wanted all of us to die so that no one could publicly talk about the horrific things we went through. As we went past the last bend, the hundreds of people watching the spectacle cheered, clapped, and celebrated. Somehow, not seeing any of the flaws with this terrible plan, we were on the straight away, and my heart started to pound again. The few seconds before we hit the net felt like slow motion. I swore I could see everyone's face. They looked happy. I couldn't believe it. It made me upset because I knew they were all about to be very disappointed. Finally, we hit the net. Of course, it was no match for a giant metal contraption hitting it. The metal pole was ripped out of the concrete slab and smashed down right in between our car and the one behind us. As we headed for the incline, we tried to get the net that attached itself to us off of the coaster. Luckily, we were able to get it off of us, but no luck with the metal beam that was now awkwardly lodged in the coaster. As we started going down, the whole ride started to shake violently. It felt like we were going to fly off the track. We made it to the first turn. I heard a loud snap and 2 screams. The 7 coaster cars behind ours broke off, and the metal beam found its way underneath. As we turned, I watched in disbelief as the cars behind us all went flying off the tracks. At that point in the ride, it was about 50 feet off the ground, still enough to kill them. I wasn't fast enough to close my eyes and saw the whole thing. It went off the track like it had wings and suddenly plummeted down into the earth. The screaming immediately stopped when the ride landed upside down. My imagination filled in the blanks and shuddered at the thought of the carnage below me. And then there were 2. We were hoping that somehow the ride would stop or slow down because we lost the back 7 cars. I was not sure what the logic was, but we were desperate at this point. After another hour, it was not showing any signs of slowing down. Once we made it to hour 8, we expected our fate. I was hoping that this would all be over soon and we could just be done. I don't think either one of us thought we'd get off. We just hoped, at this point, that our deaths would be quick. Over the next couple hours, we noticed a piece of metal on the car ahead of us start to wobble and loosen. I'm not sure if it was just the wear and tear of the ride going for so long or the whole net fiasco. It kept looking like it was about to come loose, and we duck out of the way. We were imagining the worst possible outcome, thinking it would fly off and decapitate one of us. Eventually, it did come off, but it wasn't a dramatic moment like we thought it would be. It was so much worse. Instead of coming all the way off, it only partially came off and started grinding loudly against the track. We heard an audible cringing sound from everyone watching below. The sound was horrendous. The thin strip of metal started to find its way underneath the car. Charlie was worried it would dislodge the coaster from its tracks like we saw just hours before. He told me he was going to try and grab it. I begged him not to. After a few laps of me telling him to just leave it, he made up his mind and contorted his body to try and grab the sharp metal. I couldn't see his hand as he reached down for it, but I could see his face. Somehow, that made it worse. His expression quickly changed from focused to shocked in a matter of seconds. His face was blank. I heard screaming but had no clue what was going on. He lifted up his arm and... I don't think I will ever be able to get the image of what used to be his arm out of my head. When he gripped the metal, it slipped and went deep into his forearm. I tried to grab his shoulder to calm him down, but to my shock, he was calm. He was more silent at that moment than he had been the whole day. He wouldn't even look at me. He was almost mesmerized by the sight of his bloodied, disfigured arm. I felt lightheaded and had a ringing in my ears. Watching the blood start to make its way down his entire body, then to me and the floor of the coaster. It was making me feel sick watching the blood move around the car as we went around the twists and turns of the ride. Within minutes, Charlie looked like a ghost. I did my best to try and wrap his arm up with shreds of my shirt, but it was completely pointless. I don't think an old t-shirt can help when you see the bone. I tried to talk to him. I tried to make him feel as comfortable as I could, but it was no use. He was fading in and out of consciousness. We began going up the ascent, and he finally looked over at me. I couldn't begin to explain all that I saw in his eyes. I could see the pain and sadness, but also the relief. He knew he was going to die, but I don't think he cared. He gave me a weak nod of the head and looked ahead when we went down the hill. I tried to keep a close eye on him this lap, but it was honestly hard to look at him. I heard him take a deep breath right before the loop. When we finished the loop, I looked over at him, and well, he was gone. I was now left alone in the death trap. I never imagined it could have gotten any worse. But having a dead body sitting next to you on a roller coaster is not something I would recommend. I was sitting in shock next to my dead friend for a couple hours. I was frozen in fear, not wanting to even think of a way out. After gaining some courage, I contemplated my next move. I came back into reality and realized the coaster was going just slightly slower. It wasn't significant, but if the loops were taking just slightly longer than before, that damn piece of metal that killed Charlie must have made its way underneath and not derailed it, but slowed it down. I ended up taking off my shoes and Charlie's shoes. I had a plan that was probably dumb, but if I died, at least it would be in my hands. As I went by the loading area, the coaster started to slow down just before the ascent. I threw all for shoes right in front of the ride. A part of a shoe caught the truck in just the right spot. The ride was still. I could feel the coaster, almost pulsing, trying to move with all its might. I was sore. My shoulders were badly buried by the shoulder restraints, repeatedly hitting me over and over again. My whole lower half aching from sitting in a hard seat for hours on hours. I took a deep breath and squeezed in my gut like I never had before. I let out a horrific yell as I forced my body out of the restraint that had been holding me down for the last 12 hours. About 360 times around the track. My heart was racing as I felt the coaster start to win the battle to move again. I managed to squeeze out just seconds before it took off. I was freed and jumped. Luckily, I just barely hit the net below. I also managed to hit the net, so I didn't hurt myself too badly. Nothing is worse than what that ride already did to me. I laid on the net, looking up into the sky. In disbelief. I was still. I wasn't moving. It was almost making me feel motion sick, not moving around. Like when you are reading a book in the car and you look up after an hour. Everything was blurry. I could barely hear the faint sound of people trying to get to me. But it was mostly just my ears ringing and my heart beating. After just a few minutes, I was down. They immediately rushed me to the ER, where I stayed for 3 weeks. I sustained a broken rib, a broken collarbone, severe bruising, and a concussion, just to name a few. Not to mention the mental trauma. I'm writing this as I'm feeling ready to finally tell my story. This is the first time I'm digging back into my memories and recollecting the whole experience. I've started to work through all this with a therapist, and it's made me realize I need to get it all out of my system. Don't bother trying to find anything about this story. The owners of the park have done a suspiciously good job hiding it. That's another reason I want to get my story out there. They have completely scrubbed the internet of it somehow. Although talking with a professional has helped, there are still some sounds and images that I can just never completely get out of my head. If you take one thing from my story, it's that you should trust yourself, even if you don't believe in a higher power or gut instincts.